Evening, everyone. Looking at the screen in the corner is a nice red blob, which seems to indicate we're live, which is great. So welcome, everybody. Looks like we've got some comments already before we even got started, which is great. Hellos. Yeah, so hi, Paul. Hi, Philippa. So I'll give it 30 seconds to let people catch up, but it's a good few people, a good few number of people, according to the screen anyway, who have joined us this evening, which is great. So hi, Steve. I hope we have a good little session. I've got a few little slightly different things to talk about this evening, which hopefully will be of value to all. Yeah, 7 p.m. Blimey, doesn't time go quick? Right, let's get started. So, thanks for joining, everybody. Those who know me, welcome again. Hi, Sandra. Those who don't, I'm Carl Thomas. I'm the founder of Beyond the Lens Academy, and also dog photographer at Carl Thomas Photography. So that's what I specialise in. Hi, Jessica. I've been doing that for the last 5 years or so. And part of the reason I set up Beyond the Lens Academy, because people ask me about, why you did do it and where it come from, was through the journey that I've been on to get to where I am now in terms of a pro photographer, earning a living from it. I've went on different workshops. I went on different online things, watched lots of YouTube, all sorts of different things. And what became apparent to me was some of it was very good, some of it was average, and some of it was a complete waste of time. And it was all in different places as well, which is frustrating. So I've been thinking about doing this for some time. And one of the reasons hi Jane, hi Jessica, was one of the reasons I wanted to set it up was to have some platform where literally, hi Helen, hi Chris, lots of people joining. People could join as a beginner and go all the way up to becoming a professional all in one place and have access to all sorts of different content, from video content to written content to one-to-one webinars with me to talk about specific subjects, group critiques, image feedback, everything really, all in one place. And that's kind of what Beyond the Lens is all about. So just briefly, let me just tell you a little bit about it. So if you go to the website, which is www.beyondthelensacademy.com, you will see this, which will be too small for you to read on your screens, I'm sure. So what I will do is just quickly run through what sort of stuff is on the platform. So the first thing is a direct message facility, which might seem kind of obvious, but what that does allow is anybody who's in the platform, or whatever level they're at, to drop me messages literally 24/7, and I'll get back to them. I mean, not 24/7, so although I am up at some ungodly hours these days, I will get back to them as soon as possible with an answer to their question or a general chit chat if necessary. So that's kind of obvious. We have a private Facebook group, and I certainly found these sort of things very valuable in my journey, to have a place where it's like-minded photographers, all have got the same kind of set of values, if that makes sense. And we share images, we critique each other's images, we have a conversation about things. Sometimes I run competitions. People put images up and say, what do you think about this crop versus this crop? People put a question in there saying, I'm thinking about buying a mirrorless, or should I stick with a DSLR? Always a great, interesting subject. So that's part of it for everybody. You'd expect, and there is, online learning modules in each of the different levels. They are slightly different though, in that they are so far have been recorded with members already in here. So there's a bit like this Facebook Live we're doing now. So as people ask questions, I'll answer them, and that's all recorded. So it makes it a little bit more interesting than just a bland video of somebody talking. And once those videos are uploaded to the platform, they have ability to have further comments on around, a bit like a Facebook post, so people can continue to ask questions, and other people then go and watch that video and can see what people have been asking about and get useful feedback. Mobile app, so we've got that, and we'll be rolling it out next week. It's available, but I just need to do a little webinar to show people how to use it, and that just gives people access to the training content on the go when they're out and about, which is quite handy. This one, and I was playing with this last night, so we're literally coding it all into the system right now, is keyword searchable video content. So in your library, let's imagine you're an amateur and you've got 20 or 30 videos in your library. You've been looking at them over the months, and there's something in one video that you wanted to talk or wanted to go back to and refer to, but you don't want to have to scrub through the whole video trying to find it. Well, this allows you to, at the beginning of your, not just that video, but in the entire content of your library, type in a keyword search, and it will show you every video that is in that you've had access to and where it is in each of those videos. So you can click on the word as it comes up and it'll take you to it. So taking a while to get it, but a very powerful feature. Weekly group webinars, that's something that we will be doing for everybody. We do them individually as well, to just talk about different things and different subjects. Gear reviews, this is quite popular. I've been doing this on a one-to-one basis actually with quite a lot of members who are at a point where they want to change camera equipment or buy or upgrade it, and I'm helping them make sure they invest wisely, because it's a minefield out there in terms of camera technology, as we all probably know. Image critiques, we can do them. We haven't done many of those actually, but group image critiques where we'll put a bunch of images up from individual people and have a conversation, which is great for feedback and learning. We also have the ability to do one-to-one image critiques. This tends to be at the higher levels, because obviously it takes quite a bit of time. But it is great feedback if people are trying to develop a specific style or want to look at how to edit the image differently. Then we do kind of choose your own one-to-one. So for at the higher levels, which you can see is in the Pro Aspiring Pro, you can pick a subject, whatever it is, and come on and we'll have a one-to-one. I mean, I've been doing these for all the different people at the moment, but certainly that's what we'll be doing going forward. And then lastly, before we get into some tips and tricks, is photography workshops, which should be going live again. I've been asked by a few people that we had to postpone a number of workshops that were due in March and April and May. So we're expecting to go live again with those in July. And so I shall be putting the dates in the system for those people who are interested in joining them. Obviously, those that are waiting to get back on courses that were postponed, that'll be great. But they'll be discounted for members, and also you'll get advance notice of them before they go public, if that makes sense. So that's just a brief description of it. We are closed at the moment. So we had our founding member launch back in 3 or 4 weeks ago. We're opening the doors again briefly for 4 days on the 1st of July. So keep your eyes open for that one. And let me just get this back now to me. So yes, so that's a very brief, I know it was a stock tour, but you know, I don't spend too much time talking about that, more about some tips and tricks really. So what I've got for you tonight is an attempt to try and hit the half an hour target. Doesn't seem to be working there because there's quite a lot of people on and plenty of questions, and of course start dropping your questions in the comments and I'll answer them as we go along. Let's have a little look. So far we've got lots of hellos. Helen, Chris, Jane, Jessica, Tommy, yeah, all hello, welcome. So what I thought I'd do this evening is just look at a couple of things really. One is, you know, composition. Some people often say to me, you know, oh, I love your images because, and sometimes they don't know why, if that makes sense. Might seem a bit odd. And it can be a very subtle thing. And so I'll show you some images to give you an idea, because I think it's more fun than looking at me, to be honest, especially with this big draggled look in terms of not being able to have a haircut. Let's have a look. So composition, let's go down to the images I want to show you. So here's a classic one. And it's a thing called rule of thirds. And this image is slightly wider than this. And it's, you know, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it, but I tend to crop my images usually square on. So the image and whatever subject I'm looking at is broadly in the middle. But the rule of thirds is a fairly simple thing, in that what they're saying is, if you divide the screen into literally 3 verticals or 3 horizontals and put the image or the subject that you've got in that image in that sort of third section, left or right or high or low, it has quite a pleasing effect on the eye in terms of the image, and it does. And so, for example, this image, I put one up, this is quite about a year, maybe 2 years ago, of this dog, and it's cropped normally. And I got, you know, the usual, you know, 300 or 400 people liked it and commented and stuff. And then a few days later, by accident, if I'm honest, I was playing about thinking about using it for the header on the Facebook page. So I cropped it slightly differently and ended up looking at it in a more of a rule of thirds way. And I put that up and it got like 2,000 likes. And it's the same image, just cropped differently. And so it's worth experimenting. It's very easy, particularly when you're scanning through a lot of images, just sort of go, oh, I'm going to crop it this way, I'm going to crop it that way, and just stick it in the middle and do a bit of vignette and stuff. But some images really do benefit from a rule of thirds. So that's kind of what that image is about. And then in terms of composition, we look at another image here, which is, again, a dog. So I won't apologize for dogs because that's what I do for a living. This dog called Hunter. And this was, again, it's fairly squarely cropped in. The stuff on the side here, so it's actually not been edited, so you can see my hand. So it is just the center bit. where what I've done here is, rather than just have the dog sat there or stood there, I've got a tree on the right hand side, and it just adds a little bit of structure to the composition. It brings in some kind of interest, if that makes sense. Also, you can see, annoyingly, because I normally make sure this is right, is the horizon is very slightly not square at the top. So I would normally have, I probably did actually, straightened it out. So, that's another thing to think about in terms of composition, horizons, but also bringing something else into the scene, context they call it. And it can really make quite a difference. This one here, talking about context, is the same dog. And because he was effectively doing some training, or Tony was doing some training with him, having a shot with the dog doing what he's doing tells a bit of a story. So you can see here he's bringing back a dummy to the owner, and it might seem fairly straightforward and fairly simple in terms of common sense, but it certainly is something that I sort of spend quite a lot of time thinking about when it comes to images. Another one in terms of composition, or composition even, yeah, the hard work. People often say to me, how do you get all those dogs sit looking in the right way? And the answer to that question is patience is the most important thing you can have as a dog photographer, a wedding photographer, a landscape photographer, wildlife, any kind of photography really, macro. Patience is a really important thing. And so this image took me probably half an hour to get right, to get all the dogs at least looking in the right direction, and the little puppy in the front there with his ears up, because he kept sort of looking down. So it's a combination of knowing what you're trying to achieve, having it in your mind, but also having the owner, or the trainer in this case, stood behind me, helping get the attention of the dogs and making sure they sit, and using a series of squeakers and noisemakers, and just working on it to get the image. And that's a great image. I mean, they're not all perfectly looking at me, but they're all certainly looking in the right direction. So it can be a challenge. So I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on composition, because it's not there is no right or wrong answer to composition, because of course photography is all about what you're trying to create. So let's give it a bit now. So it kind of is a personal thing, and so like the rule of thirds thing is another personal thing. It's just worth trying, and you'll be amazed how just cropping an image just slightly differently can transform it. Another one, I haven't got an example here. Let me think. I might probably have. Yeah, this one. There's a thing called, I think they call it negative space, but what I mean is to the left of this image, if it's looking the right way around on the screen to you guys, in front of the dog's paw and his nose, there's a bit of space. So it's not really a rule of thirds thing. It's just allowing some space to tell the story of the image. So if he was cut off, it would look odd. So if the dog's about to jump into, jumping in one direction, having some space there can make a huge difference, because it just shows in the image that there's some space there and the dog's going to do something. So it really does make quite a difference. Let's just check here. I've got some questions here. Oh, here we go. It's a good question, Steve. What are your thoughts regarding cropping for Instagram, which tends to be square images? Yeah, Instagram is what it is. And so it can be frustrating. It does limit you a little bit. What I usually do, so an image like this, I would actually have the border showing at the top and bottom, and I'd rather have the image slightly smaller and show this sort of crop, if that makes sense, than having it square on. So I'll sometimes do that. The other thing you can do in in Instagram, which I occasionally do, is there's the ability to use multiple images. So you effectively create one picture, but with 3 or 4 in it. So you might have a horizontal landscape one like this at the top and 2 more square ones underneath it. It's a thing called layout, which I think is part of Instagram. So sometimes I do that. So I hope that answers your question, Steve. But yeah, I mean, it's not rocket science. All I would say is think about it when you're taking the image. And, photography is not about rushing. And obviously, when you're first starting out, you're thinking about settings and all that kind of stuff. And if you're a pro like me, you're thinking about getting all the stuff that you need for the client to make sure you hit the brief. But, don't rush it. If you've got a scenario, particularly if it's a landscape or an inanimate object, just take some images at different settings, but also different composures or different compositions, because it can transform your photography in terms of the image that you get out the other end. So yeah, everybody, plenty of people on here. That's good. So just ask as many questions as you like, and they don't have to be about this subject. It could be anything you like. There's no limits. Can't guarantee I'll know the answer to it. Let's have a look at it. Paul Spencer, welcome, Paul. How do you get the incredible watermark? Good question. I'm glad you like it. They are what's called a PNG file, so it's a portable network graphic file. I can't remember the technical term for it, but basically they're transparent. So in Lightroom, what I do is when I export the images, I've got my watermarks all in there, and I decide, well, which watermark I'm going to use. In this case, it's the one that sits at the bottom in the middle, slightly opacity, so it's not in your face too much, and you can still see the image behind the letters. And I pick it, and then when I export the images, they're all added, or the watermark is added to each individual image in the same place. So it's quite a quick way of doing it. If you're asking how I created it, just use a design company. There's plenty out there. There are some pretty inexpensive ones as well. I mean, the watermark, actually, it could be the one up. I'm not sure which one, Paul, so perhaps you could mention you're talking about here. So there's one on that says Carl Thomas Photography, which is on my picture, but there's also this little one at the top here. So I don't know if that's the one you're thinking about. Either way, it's I briefed that to a design company to come up with a watermark for the business, told them what the business is about, told them the component parts of it, and they came up with various options. And that's what we got. So I hope that answers your question, Paul. Thank you. So Philippa, welcome, Philippa. What's Philippa asking? With regard to a multi-dog shot, which dog did you focus on, or did you come off single point focus? Good question. I'll have still used single point focus. Let's put that photo back up again, because you should be able to tell by looking at the image. No, that's a good question, actually, because it does. I'll take your question away because it's in the way a bit there. So let me just get rid of that. No, it's up here, isn't it? All right. So there's a couple of things to think about when you've got a scenario like this. So you've got a dog here. Then the one nearest the camera is the little black pup, and the one furthest to the back is I think it's a pointer, getting old a bit. So the difference between the depth of the front and the back there is probably a couple of 3 feet. So I would have been shooting quite wide, as in wider angle, probably my 24-70 for that, or I might have been stood further back using the 70. But I would have dropped so I would have probably focused on, looking at that, I'd have probably tried to focus on, actually probably on the pup or the lab in the back with his tongue out. But using a wide, a sort of slightly shallow aperture, sort of a f3, f4, f5, probably. Certainly looking at the very background of the image, it's soft, but not as soft as some of mine. So that will have given me a different depth of field. So it's really important to do that, because if you leave that at 2.8, quite close, you take a photo of the dog with his tongue out, then the dog to his left and his right will be sharp, and all the ones in the front will be soft. So it's a good point. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Philippa, but thank you. Yeah, Phil, or Paul, sorry. Yeah, beyond the lens, so the little thing at the top there. Yeah, it's a great little logo. Now, I'm glad you like it. That's I've got one more design coming in this evening. I just couldn't wait to use that one, because I've had about 4 or 5 different options. That one's a clear winner so far in the private Facebook group that members are in. I put it up there as a little poll, and that one won hands down. So yeah, we're looking to use that. Other than the X design that's coming in probably tomorrow, I doubt it's going to beat that, because I just love that one. So that's what we're going to use. Right, let's go back to some pictures. So keep the questions coming. As I say, there's no right or wrong. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is action photography. Very popular, and it doesn't matter whether it's dogs, but anything moving fast that you want to get that really tack sharp image. It's a question I get asked all the time, or a comment people often make about my photography, which is, how do you get them so sharp and all that kind of stuff. So let's see, so there's a question popped in there. Chris Powell, thank you, Chris. Do I work in manual? Excuse the cough. Sometimes. Mostly I would shoot in shutter priority, because the shutter speed is paramount to me. Because if I get that wrong, then nothing else will be right, because the images won't be sharp enough, even with still images. If you look at all these dogs here, you might say, well, they're all sat still. They're not. They've been running around, they're panting, they're all sort of shimmering and shaking, so you still need a fastest shutter speed. I will work in manual if, for example, I'm doing landscape photography and I'm using filters and I want to get the composition right and I'm using a really low shutter speed. If I'm doing wildlife photography, I typically would shoot in shutter priority anyway. So sometimes I use manual, but mostly in one of the priority modes, which is typically shutter priority. Another question here from Paul. Are you using a full frame camera? I am, yes. I use a Canon 1DX Mark II, which is a full frame camera, which I love. But I started doing this with a 7D. Well, actually, I started with a 40D. So those Canon shooters out there will know that that's quite an old camera now, but that's what they call a crop sensor. APS-C sensor is another term for it. And they're fine, nothing wrong with them. Full frame gets you slightly better control over depth of field. and you arguably a slightly better image quality, but they cost more because the sensors cost more. So, you know, hope that answers that one, Paul. God, loving all these questions. Brilliant. Keep them coming. Jessica. Hello, Jessica. Every time I try and get a photo of my dog running about, it goes blurry. Brilliant. Everybody does that. And even I get it all the time. Not all the time, some of the time. So the most important thing with dog photography, two things with action photography of dogs, or any subject actually, is, hi Alan, welcome, is the shutter speed. So a dog that's moving, you're going to need a shutter speed of, depending on how fast he's moving, at least 1,000, maybe 15 or 16 or 1,600. I don't think you can normally set it to 15. So I'm typically shooting at 1,600 or more for action. And the next thing, so that's the shutter speed. So you're going to freeze the action, but of course the camera's got to be focused on the dog. And in order to achieve that, depending on what kind of camera you've got, you want to use I use single point focus. So what that means is where the single point is will be where the camera focuses, and I try and make sure obviously I keep that on the dog. Takes a bit of practice, so you need to get used to moving your camera around slowly and in a really smooth way. But yeah, make sure you've got a fast shutter speed, and make sure that the focus point is the single point if you can adjust that, and make sure that's over the dog because that's where it's going to focus. Here we go. I like the sound of this question. Hi Jane. I have a terrier that can run at warp speed, really difficult to get in focus on action shots. The lab who is flopped out next to me is easier. What focus points do you use? Well, yeah, good question. I know I just sort of touched on it, but yeah, I still use single point most of the time. This is potentially one of the scenarios where I might stray from my infamous single point setting, because a little terrier in the distance running at you is quite hard. It's sometimes hard to get the focus point on the dog, let alone on his face and his nose and his eyes. So depending on the background, if the background was relatively bland, and what he's running on is, you know, relatively even in terms of colors and textures, so like grass, for example, I might be tempted to move from single point to multi-point, but the small group that's in the middle, so the 9 focus points or 6 focus points, whatever your camera will give you, that's just in the middle, because there's a lower risk in that scenario of the focusing system grabbing, you know, a branch or a twig or something that's different, because it's all relatively smooth. So that's worth thinking about. But yeah, little terriers can be a challenge to photograph. We'll come on to a minute in another image. I'll show you another way of getting a sharp action shot of a dog. So rather than trying to follow and track it, make sure you know where it's going to be and have the focus where he's going to be. And we'll come on to that in a sec. Let's have a little look. It is a good question. Ben, hi Ben. What is your depth of field normally? Well, I shoot at a very wide aperture, so I like, I'm not in this image because I needed a decent depth of field, but typically I'll be shooting at f2.8. So depth of field is something that varies. So the amount of image that's in focus, which is called the depth of field, is changed by the aperture. So that's important. So if I shoot at 2.8, shooting say at this sort of distance, I might have, I don't know, an inch or two of depth of field. But if I zoom out and I stay in the same place, the depth of field will increase. And if I step back, my distance from the subject. So depth of field is changed by aperture, the distance between you and the subject, and how wide your zoom is on your camera, and also what kind of sensor you got. So there's quite a lot of things to think about. Let's have a look. Here's a good question from Matthew. Hello, Matthew. Do you alter the position of your single point or just keep it in the center? No, I do move it around actually. So I've got it set on my thumb wheel so I can move it quite quickly. I mean, most of the time I leave it in the middle, but yeah, I will move it around. So yeah, Ben saying, so high speed, low, yes. So for action shots, I'd have a high shutter speed and, well, a low depth of field from a point of view of the creative impact that gives to the image, as in it will look lovely, but that can make it a bit harder for you because the camera's only got a very shallow depth of field to look at. So when you're starting out, maybe try and shoot at 3 or 4 or 5 f-stop, because that gives you a little bit more depth of field. So you've got a better chance of getting more images sharp, especially when you start. Let's have a look. It's a good one here. Mark, hi. How do you create the black background acting as a studio shoot? Okay, good. I don't use, I haven't done, or I have done studio work, but I don't, that's not what I do for a business now. What I do is I call it studio in the field. So I don't think, let me, have I got any images? No, I probably haven't in here. What I'll try and do there is I'll shoot the image knowing that's what I want to end up with. A bit like what you're looking at. If you can see me, let me just get rid of this picture a minute. So this, well, leave the question up. So the background here is behind me is dim. So I'd be looking for a scenario with a dog where there's like a break in the hedge line or the tree line where there's like a little entry of a path. And I'll get the dog sat where the light is on the dog and the background is dark and obviously not black. And you can still see there's a clock up there, and behind me there's pictures of dogs, shock horror, and various bits, and you can see this stuff up here, these lines. So that's fine, because I know that when I go to edit it, I can change it. So what I do is I take the image, it look like this in camera, and then in post-production in Lightroom, I'll turn around, I'll get the what's called a radial filter, I'll put that over the image and then adjust everything outside of the filter and turn it down. And then you can use a brush to go around the edges. But what's important is to have the image set shot so the background is already a little bit dark. Because if you try and do that to an image, like if I go back to this, when you try and do that in this, it will look like you've done it, and it looks rubbish because you've gone and turned down all of this detail here and all the stuff that's around these dogs, and there's a very defined line between the edge of the dog and the darkness. It doesn't look right. So you want it to be a little bit like that to start with, if that makes sense. Hope that answers your question. Ben, I have a 5D and a 70. Yes, fantastic combination. I used a 5D Mark III for 3 years, and I've had my 1DX for 2, both full frame cameras. But the 5D is a great camera, and the 70-200 is my favorite lens in the world for dog photography. Generally, it's a great all-round lens anyway. It's perfect because it's on a full frame camera. The 70 is relatively wide, bearing in mind us humans, we see in about 50 mil. That's what we're looking at. So 70 mil is just a bit wider. So yeah, no, that would be a great combination. You won't go wrong there. Let's have a look. Oh, you shoot weddings, Ben. Okay, well, welcome to the dog side. Weddings is good, and it's certainly, you'll probably, well, you will, I should imagine, use your 70-200 weddings. It's perfect for getting those candid shots of people without having the camera in their face. So it's a brilliant lens. That's another question from Ben. Do you handhold or always tripod monopod? Nope, I'm always handheld for dog photography anyway. Tripods I'll do when I need it for things like landscapes or sunsets. And I might use a monopod if I'm using a big 600mm or 500mm lens and I'm doing wildlife photography. I much prefer to be able to move around. So yeah, that makes sense. So enough other questions. Well, keep them coming because it makes it more interesting for everybody else, and I certainly love answering them. Let me go back to some pictures. So somebody asked, we were talking about the terrier shot just now. So this is a shot that helps me describe what I'm going to explain to you. So these dogs, as you can see, are jumping over, and I've frozen the action. What you can see only marginally is the spaniel that's nearest to us, the further it's jumped first, is slightly soft, and that's fine because that's not what this image is about. What I'm using this image for is to show you a technique which I think I've touched on before. So if you think about your terrier, they're zigzagging all over the field, and it's so difficult to track them. These dogs, we grab this log, and it might have already been there, but find a path or a track where you can get the dog to run at, and so he's going to come around the corner or down a track, and place something across it that they're going to jump over. Make sure they can see it. They run into it. This I think was probably already there, but it doesn't have to be a big log like this. Just a little stick that's a few inches off the ground will make them jump. And then what you do is you do a thing called pre-focusing. So rather than trying to track these dogs, because you've got a black dog and a brown dog there, the focusing systems, I mean, even on my 1DX, will struggle with that because it's quite bland colours. And so that can be a challenge. So rather than trying to track the dogs, I do pre-focusing. So I use something called back button focus, which is where I use the button on the back to start the focusing and switch it on and off. And it's literally, if I press it, it's focusing. If I let go, it's not. I will put my single focus point on that branch, tree trunk. I'll set my shutter speed to a fast shutter speed. I'll get myself comfortable, and that's really important with action photography. And I'll point that single point at that branch, take my finger off the back button. So focusing now is locked. It's not going to move anywhere because when I press the shutter, focusing doesn't work on my camera. So back button focus is how that operates. And then as the dogs approach, I'll literally press the shutter down and keep my finger on it, and I'll probably take 10 images. And so there's a sequence of images that aren't here to show you, but with the springer in the front, just over the log, then almost over the log, and then so on. And so what you end up then with is the dog's jumping through where the focus already is, rather than you trying to put the focus on the dog. It's a very, very simple thing to do, and it's very effective. So what you can see here is the log, and just slightly in front of it, probably to the tail or the back legs of the Springer Spaniel, is sharp. So that's where the depth of field is. So as long as I don't physically move backwards and forwards myself, and don't touch the AF button, then everything that's in that space, log and foot in front of it, will be sharp. And there might be the dog's heads, it might be his toes, it might be his ears and his tail, but that's how it works. So I find that to be a very, very useful little technique. So let's go back to a few questions because they're flashing in the corner here. Let's have a look here. It says different one. What's this one? Hi, Caroline. Thank you for your question. What do you think of using editing apps for use with phone cameras? And would you recommend? Yes, I think it's brilliant. Where could I show it? I haven't got any. I'm just trying to think of an image. Let me just check in case I have it in here, because there's an image I took with my iPhone. I quite often take my iPhone. No, I don't have any here, I'm afraid. But yeah, it's a really good idea. And one of the things that we're going to be launching inside the membership soon is a iPhone photography series of training videos, because, well, iPhone straight smartphone, because there are so many things you can do. And you know, it's so frustrating I haven't got the image here, but some of the images that I put on my Facebook page are iPhone shots, and people can't tell the difference because they'll go, oh, I love that image, and I'll get 1,000 likes or whatever. And so you can do a lot with an iPhone, and and you can do very basic editing. And yeah, so I'm wishing on a bit there, I know, apologies, but yeah, it's the answer to that question. Next question down here. Courtney. Oh, Courtney. Good to see you. We were chatting earlier on. Courtney's one of these people that was hoping to come on one of our workshops, but because we had to cancel it, and other things are taken over. So yeah, good to see you. Thank you. Right, let's have a look. Sorry, Jackie, there's a little question there. I don't use auto, and a big part of what we're doing for people in the academy is there's a whole program of getting you off auto. Because the thing with auto, it will take an image for you, but it will not be, you know, if you're trying to do the sort of stuff I'm showing here, or just anything that you want to do in your mind, generally speaking, auto is no good for it. So we spend a lot of time helping people get off auto, because that's when you start really enjoying photography. Obviously, your photos are amazing. Oh, well, thank you very much. It's very kind of you, Corinne. How did you get yourself so well known? Do you advertise, word of mouth, or something else? I'd love to do more pet photography, but only have intermittent work. Okay, brilliant question. So where do I start with that question? The first bit, it's taken 5 years, but a big part of it, and I've got in the pro level members, we've got a number of people in there at the moment, one of which has just done her first paid photography session. So I've done a lot of help with her to sort of get that going, and how the process works, how you charge, and all those kind of things. But it all starts with kind of social media and having a website. So you've got to have a website, you've got to call yourself, come up with a name, get a logo, get a Facebook page, and they're fairly basic things to do. So we could all do that in 24 hours. But then you start and deciding what you're going to do is what is your offer, and just be clear about that, and then just start to post regular things on Facebook. And one of the things, and I was touching on this, so I'll share this little secret with everybody here since you've asked a question. One of the things with Facebook, and I've got going on 24,000 people that follow me now, is to understand that and even when I had 1,000 followers, a fairly large proportion of those people follow my work because they just love photography and they love dogs, and we're a nation of dog lovers. So they're not necessarily like to be clients, but they love my work. So you've got to keep that in mind when you're posting stuff. So I don't, on my Facebook page, post all the time, book me now, here's a special offer and all that kind of stuff, because clients don't like it and they won't share those sort of posts. So you have to have a little process, and it's called 3-2-1, that's what I call it, where you'll do 3 or 4 posts that are just pictures of dogs that you've done on photo sessions, or whatever your subject is that you're doing. Might be portraits, might be headshots, could be weddings. And then you have what they call a soft sell, where you'll put an image up that's got a bit like this one, and you might sort of say, this was a great fun day taking these photos of these dogs. If you'd like a photo session, drop me a message. So it's a sell, but it's very soft. It's just like mentioning it. And then you'll do, I've got one running at the moment, which is a Father's Day offer. So, which is a more of a hard sell, so probably the wrong word, but it is a sell. So it's a load of my images, and Father's Day is coming up at the weekend. So photo sessions are half price. So instead of £149 for the photo session, I'm charging £74.50 and offering people the ability to have a little e-voucher that's tailored that they can give away, or give to their fathers or whatever on Father's Day. And that's a hard sell, but I don't do them very often. So to build up the following, that's a very important thing. I don't advertise. The only thing I do is occasionally I'll boost posts on Facebook, make sure I've got a decent website. I haven't really changed it much in some years. I've got a Google ad campaign, but I'll put a tenner a month on that, so I don't spend a fortune. So yeah, pet photography or any kind of photography is all very possible, and it's just understanding the sort of the bones that make it up. And then there's one final thing I would say, and it's very common with photographers. I know some really good photographers who take absolutely stunning images, but they'd be the first to admit that the business side of things is not something they're good at. And so one of the things we help a lot for photographers is in the pros, aspiring pro section, is that. Because being a great photographer is one thing, but as your question suggests, getting following and getting people to book you and getting well known is half of it. And so you almost have to be a business person first and a photographer second. So a bit of a long answer, but a great question. Thank you for that one. Here we go. Hi, Sandra. Would you advise new or used lenses? It's a good question. Either or, really. And new, you can have problems with new lenses, but obviously they're under warranty. But used lenses are fine. Just make sure you get them from a decent place. eBay can be a brilliant place. You can have some fantastic results, but you can also get the opposite. So I'd be a bit careful with eBay. Wex Photography, which is a great big website, one of the biggest ones out there now. Park Cameras, MPB, they're all people, suppliers of new gear that will sell you used gear, all with a bit of a warranty. And so Park Cameras, for example, we've got shops. I think Wex have as well, but certainly Park Cameras, who I use, they've got shops. You can go and have a look at the gear as well, and you can get some really good savings. So, whilst you're on a budget and sort of trying to get the best quality, a used better quality lens versus a new less quality lens is a no-brainer. I'd get the used better quality lens. So hope that answers that one. Let's have a look. Steve, good question. Do you stick to your main subject, i.e. dogs, on your website, or do you also... now this is a good point. And it's a thing called developing a personal style. And I'm going to have a whole section about this in the platform for the pros, and actually for the amateurs as well, because a lot of landscape photographers say they're not pro, but people want to buy their images. So I only, with a very rare exception, posts dogs, because people, when they come to my website or my Facebook page, are in theory thinking about booking me to take photos of their dogs, and they don't want to see other stuff. They want to know that this is the guy who's the dog photographer and this is his main thrust. So my advice from a business point of view would be to avoid that. Much as it's great to show your work, and I'm sure people want to do that, it is not a really good business idea to sort of share loads of different things, because it's like going to a supermarket to get a bottle of wine versus an off license. They've got a bigger choice in the off license, so I know where I'd go, if that makes sense. Right, what we've got here, let's have a look. That's another question. Andrews, hi Carl, your work is amazing. What camera lens do you mostly use? Okay, well, I've used a few over the years, but my current camera is a Canon 1DX Mark II, which is their flagship model, except there's a Mark III out now, so I'm looking at that. But it's only 2 years old, the one I've got. And my favorite lens, which I use 99% of the time for dog photography, is a 70-200 f2.8 Mark III, I think. And it's the Canon L lens, which is their Pro Series lens, so it's just more robust and weather sealed and stuff. So that's what I do. I don't use lots of different lenses. Hi, Billy from Isla, where it is, Bonnie, Scotland, or the How to Hebrides. So that's a little slow of questions. Let's get back to some images then. So we were talking about this picture here, which is the pre-focus scenario to get images sharp, thinking about the terrier, or dogs like these two, dark colours, they can be a challenge. You're trying to photograph a Labrador, black one, running at you, your camera's going to really struggle. Anybody with a camera, point it at your wall in decent light. If it's Magnolia, which mine are in this house, you see what it does. It will buzz and hunt, and because the camera kind of go, I can't see contrast, so it needs a bit of an edge, a difference in tone or colour to be able to grab focus. So that's what's going on. It doesn't matter how expensive your camera is. Sure, they get a little bit better at it as they get more expensive, but even mine, if I point it at my wall, will be struggling. Oh, here's Haley. Me again. Love it. Do you use a tripod or do you freehand shoot the dogs? I never use tripod. I use freehand, so I've always got my camera handheld for dog photography. Yeah, so I hope that helps there. So let's get back to this another image I wanted to show you. Where is it? So along the lines of this pre-focus thing. So here's a classic scenario. Average light. The sun's coming out now, but average overcast light and a black dog that's small, and it's action photography, a challenge. Well, here's I can't remember his name now. Let's call him Doug the Pug for the purpose of this, but I can't remember his name. Oh, it's so annoying. I want to say Albie. I think he might be an Albie. But anyways, little pug. So he's wet because we had him in the river running around doing things. But as you can probably see from the rest of that image, it's a bit overcast. So overcast dog, black dog, small dog, difficult to do. So I found we were in the field at the edge of the brook, and I found a place where there was a little bit of a track. And as you could probably just see, it goes off and bears right as you look at the image. So when we got him running, so I got the owner stood behind me, we got him sat around the corner, and we did two actually. We got version 1, which is that, and then version 2 with the customer sat the other side and throwing a tennis ball over my shoulder. So I'm lying down, or certainly kneeling down, and I've focused. So there's no, you can't see the log here, but just below this image, I just put a tiny little twig, about 2 inches, 1 inch in diameter, enough for the dog to want to put his legs up. And they don't have to be going desperately fast, but to get the shot with both legs forward and the rear legs backwards, which is what's going on here because you can't see them, is obviously the kind of the shot that clients want to see because it just looks lovely. So I pre-focused again. I knew he was going to come running at me because that's what we set up. I had the camera single focus point pointing at the twig, and then I recomposed. So actually probably what I might have done here is drop the focus point down and then just kept my camera steady, and set the shutter speed up reasonably high. I will have had the ISO reasonably high here as well because it's overcast. And as he comes running at me, when he gets near to that point, a foot from the point that I know is in focus, finger on the shutter, and 10 images later, I've got them saved. And I'll do that a couple, 3 times, and you end up with an image like this, which is typically a very hard image to do, but it's very popular. He's a lovely little dog, and it's not something you see often, a pug doing this. Anyway, let's go back to questions. So we got a few in here, which is good. How are we doing for time? Yeah, all good. Right. Let's have a look. I love this question. Hi, Jackie. Thanks for your question. Another question. Do you shoot in JPEG or RAW, and what is the difference? I love that question, and it's a really important one. I shoot in RAW, and so that's answered the first part. Got my phone's ringing. Let's get rid of that. The difference between the two, I'm just holding my phone up so you can't hear the vibrations. The difference between the two is a raw image is kind of is what it suggests. So what happens there is my camera takes the image, it sticks it on, the sensor looks at it, and in the mini microseconds it takes, it takes all that data, and it's noughts and ones, so it's digital information, and it saves it to the file, and it saves all of it. Everything. So in this image, all the pixels it sees, it saves. All the data it sees, it saves. Then what happens is you have to edit. So a raw image will actually, out of the camera, look a little bit flat, maybe not tack sharp, and some of the colors might be a little bit off. So you just typically have to do a fairly basic edit to even a raw image just to finish it off. And obviously quite a lot of those things you're trying to do to it creatively. A JPEG is let me do this. I need to find a way of switching that phone off. There we go. Let's go to that. Oh, it's answering now. Oh, how frustrating. Good. Right, bear with me. If all else fails, takes the battery out. There we go. Right. So sorry about that. Back to JPEG. So what a JPEG is a smaller file. So in the early days of digital photography, when the press guys were using them, they liked JPEG for 2 reasons. It's a smaller file, so it's easier to send it up the internet, because in the early days it was more difficult to have bandwidth. And then also it's kind of pre-edited. So that's the point I'm getting to. A JPEG will take into account the settings you've got on your camera. So the white balance, the picture style and color you know, all the various settings that you can put in the back of the camera, it will take those into account. And what it does is it kind of does like a quick edit. It goes, okay, this client says I want this done, so, or the camera set like this, so it'll quickly save those images, and it will save the images based on that edit. If that makes sense. It will chuck a load of data away. So if you looked at this image here, where we've got all these greens on the side, it would get rid of half of the it would get rid of half of the spots, you know, so all their sort of pixels. So where it looks at something. So if you take the dog, for example, on his forehead, there's lots of dark grey images there, and it's all pixels and black, and so it gets rid of half the data. In order to make the file size smaller, which is its plan, its sort of aim in life, it gets rid of pixels. So the image will still look okay, but when you come to edit, if you're trying to bring out the shadows and the detail inside of this picture, then you'll find that half the data is not there. So you won't have the same latitude, if that makes sense. So I always shoot in RAW as a result of that. But if you don't have the ability to edit, then you probably need to shoot in JPEG, because the RAW images will be slightly flatter, would be my answer to that question. So I know which one. Sorry about the phone interruption, put me off a bit there. Let's have a look. Thank you. I'm about to get the 1DX2. Wow. Yeah, you'll love that. The 7200, brilliant. The 1DX2 now is certainly more cost effective, and that's what quite often a good thing to think about when it comes to used equipment. When the new model comes out, the previous one becomes a lot less costly. So, hi Haley, that's not a problem. Once again, it's me. I've got an external hard drive for my final images at 2 terabytes. What do you use to save yours to? Please, is looking for a second thing and just wondered what you use. The Mac has had enough of the million pictures I have. Yeah, so I use separate little drives, a bit like this one. So I've got these lacy ones with the orange thing on, which are sort of pretty bomb proof, so you can drop them around and dump them and stuff like that, and they're pretty robust. I mean, they don't, you know, I'm not sure if they're waterproof, but they're good. So I use those. I think one of these is, I think they're both I think both 1 terabyte ones. So yeah, I use those. They tend to work quite well. But it is worth getting organized, because you can very quickly fill up your computer and it won't like it. All the fans will start running and it will slow down. So, right. So yeah, so in terms of this image, that's kind of how we got that image. And it kind of works quite well. Now, another one I'll show you that is not too dissimilar in terms of the strategy is this one. Gusto is called, and it's the same sort of thing. The issue you've got here is I'm down low, and as he runs up towards me, there's this heather in the way. The camera can't track it because he can't see him. Now, I know he's going to jump over it, but he's not. There's nothing there to sort of see, even though there's a break in the header. So I would use the same system I use as far as the little black pug's concerned. I focus a little bit on this header, knowing that's where he's going to be. And I was lucky, because sometimes photography is about being in the right place at the right time. In the sequence of shots, we got this slightly cheeky one with his tongue out and his ears sticking up at the top. And client loved it. It's something I use quite a lot on Facebook, because it's always a very attention-grabbing, scroll-stopping image. And I was able to use my sort of f2.8 here, because the light was quite bright. Make sure I had the light behind me, which was fortunate because of the way the heather was. So yeah, that kind of worked quite well on that image. Let's have a little look. Any more questions? Oh yeah, something in here. Let's have a look. No, it's Haley saying thank you. It's not a problem, Haley. I'm always happy to answer questions. And as I think I often said at the Steve said, yeah, love this shot, ears and tongue. Yeah, it's quite important. I think I touched on one of the other webinars about this whole thing about not looking and spending too much time looking at your settings. You check them, obviously, but be ready, because it's amazing what kind of images you can capture. Those candid, funny, random shots can be extremely popular and very gratifying sometimes. So let me just see what else I've got. Any more questions? Drop them in, because we'll be wrapping up in sort of 5 minutes or so, I'd say. Let's have a little look. There was one question. So here's another action shot. Now this one, I was using tracking. And I think I touched on this the other day, because I knew which way he was coming and I could see him. And because I angled it so the light was coming to his left, yeah, that's right. Well, to the left of the image, it creates a little contrast down his nose. So you've got his nose and his face and the eye, so that helps the focusing system. So that certainly worked. But you can see I used a very, very shallow depth field here, so I was quite a lot closer when this image was taken. Shoot at f2.8, and you could probably see, I would say it's sharp from the front of his ears, across the top of his forehead, down to his nose, maybe just in front of his nose, as in towards his eyes. So a very, very shallow depth of field. And it just, if you get it right, like in this image, it looks lovely because the background's all nice and soft. This image, with everything else in the background really nice and sharp, still be okay, but it doesn't have that same creative sort of pop, which, you know, from a professional point of view, which is kind of what I do, that's what clients want to see. It's harder, that's what they pay for. But even if you're doing it as a hobby, it just makes it's the difference between a nice image, if it's all sharp, and an image that stands out. So yeah, let's go back to our infamous questions. Let's see what we got here now. Okay, lost reception, no problem. Re-span you on the tongue. Why did you focus on the eyes? That's all right. So that one, let's go back to him. I'll put him back up for us so we know what we're talking about. Where is he? Expand you. I think it's this one. The focus point here was actually not on his eyes or his ear or his face, because I was using pre-focus, Sandra. So I was focusing on the header. It's just here, and then leaving it sat there without. So I pre-focused on the header, took my finger off the focus button, which is the back button on my camera, and then just used the shutter. So the camera was metering and taking images, but the focus was not adjusting, if that makes sense. So effectively, it just stayed like that. So that's how I got that sharp image. Because he was out of bounds, I couldn't see him. The chances of me, the camera, picking him up as he jumped up and tracking again it sharp, pretty remote. So that's a much better way of doing it. Let's have a look. Let's go back to the comments. Let's see. Right, okay, let's have a look. Yeah, it's another similar question. So I use single point focus. I always try. So in terms of an image for dogs, actually for portraits of people or anything really, you want the eye sharp. So I will always focus on the eyes. Bear in mind, of course, a dog running at you at 30 miles an hour, sometimes it's hard just to get the focus point on the dog, but try and aim for the eyes. There's another one. Do you find it easier? That's a good question, actually, this. Do you find it easier to shoot dogs running towards you or running past side view? That's a good question, actually. I'd say it's probably easier running at you because the framing side of it becomes less of an issue. Because you've got they're just getting bigger and bigger in the frame as they run towards you. Running sideways, yeah, it's a different kind of setting. I wouldn't say it's harder, but it's slightly different. Sometimes you need a slightly faster shutter speed because if they're shooting across the frame, then the action in terms of the sensor, what it's seeing move, can be quite a bit faster. So sometimes I'd up the shutter speed, if that makes sense. But yeah, it can be fun. One of the things that it can be really good with dogs running sideways is the panning technique. So if you get a shutter speed of, say, 1600 and you're panning with the dog, and you keep taking shots, you're going to get sharp images of the dog and whatever's in the background because there's a fast shutter speed. So if you just drop it down a little bit, say to 1000, the dog's body and head potentially is sharp. So it's a classic motorbike shot and motor racing shot you've seen where the car's sharp and the background's all blurred. So you just can tell from the image, you get this sort of feeling of fast action. So that's kind of how I do that. And it can be quite creative. It's certainly challenging. But yeah, that's what we do there. Let's have a look. What is your favorite dog to capture? I can't say I've got one, to be honest. I've done I would say every dog, but most dog breeds that are out there, I've done photos of. So, you know, from Chihuahuas to Bernese mountain dogs, all sorts. So, I mean, I do like gun dogs because I've got gun dogs. And so any dogs that are going to run around fast and jump up and down like lunatics, I enjoy doing because of the challenge. And it's great to see the owners' face when they get to see the images, if that makes sense. So I hope that answers that question. Let's have a little look here. What we've got here. When tracking a dog with the 7200, do you use mode 1 or mode 2 stabilization? Matthew, that's a really good question. And I'm glad you asked it because I don't use either. So we'll spend a minute on. In fact, we'll obviously answer more questions as they come up, but this is really important. It's a common misconception with image stabilization that appears on lenses or even in body now on cameras. What the image stabilization is meant to do, and I know there is 2 modes, and the mode 2, I think, or one of those 2 modes is for panning. So it stops. It's meant to just compensate for up and down movement and not the left or right movement. Oh, here we go. Working from home. Dog's going nuts. Oh, and my phone's going nuts now. It's all going on, isn't it? So getting back to image stabilization, what's going on there is that the concept of it, when it was launched, and it still is the case, is it's meant to deal with camera shake. So the ability for you, when you're holding your camera, and this isn't the camera because it's in the box, but your iPhone, when you're taking an image, it's compensating for this. And so when you're using a really slow shutter speed of, say you've got a 100mm lens and you're supposed to be shooting a 100th of a second to a handhold, below which you need to use a tripod, image stabilization lets you go below that. So you could probably shoot at a 25th of a second and still get a sharp image, because the image stabilization sort of compensates for those little movements. Now, if you think about that for a second, and the way it works in the lens is it's moving, all the little optics are on little gyroscopic motors, which is why you can hear a buzzing noise. So the lenses are all sort of moving slightly to compensate for this sort of movement. Think about that, and then think about the lens pointing at a dog running at you and you're moving the lens around like this. It's going to try and overcompensate for that. So actually, image stabilization for action photography, and some of the lens manufacturers will disagree with this, but I've been doing it for 5 years and I've certainly found out the hard way, it will create a blurry image because it's compensating for your movement, trying to compensate for that, plus the dog's moving. So my advice for action photography generally is to not use it. Now, the frustrating thing is that the best lenses quite often have it as standard now. So you're paying for a feature you probably won't use much. So that may be a surprise to a few people, but certainly I would make sure, switch it off, and try it. Do some shots with a dog with it on and do it with it off, and you'll quite often see quite a noticeable difference. I've sometimes, because the button on mine is on the bottom of the lens on the left, and sometimes I accidentally nudge it, and I'll look at a sequence of images and think, oh, there's a couple, there's not as many there that would be shot sharp as they should, and so that's because I've sometimes knocked the button on. So it's something I avoid. Now, if the Canon guys were here, and I've spoken to them about this, and we have debates regularly about it, they would say, yeah, but our latest version, we've got a mode 3 on some of our posh lenses, which doesn't work until you actually press the shutter. So it for a milli microsecond stabilize the image, and it's like, well, but it's still going to compensate for your movement. So yeah, I mean, it can work in some scenarios, but for action shots generally, I would avoid it. That makes sense. So I hope that helps. Certainly one that let's put what's in the question here. Let's have a look. Yep, there you go, Matthew. Try it. And certainly the mode 1, mode 2 thing, the panning one. The concept of that is it switches off the adjustments for the lens is dealing with left and right and up and down movement. The panning mode, which I think is mode 2 on the lens, is got the up. It's still dealing with up and down movement, but it stops trying to adjust for that. So in theory, that's worth trying if you're panning. But for me, I don't bother having it on. Another good question here: if you can't afford lenses capable of 2.8, would you still go for shutter priority? Okay, that's an interesting question. So it's really more about what you're trying to deal with in the image. So I always shoot in shutter priority because the shutter speed is important to me, and even more so if I've got an f3 lens or an f4 lens, because my lens is set at that, or because the lens as maximum capacity is that, then what I would do is it starts to become more challenging, but still more important, because the shutter speed's my go-to setting. So then I'm going to be thinking about the ISO and putting the ISO up. So absolutely, yeah, definitely. And you don't always have to shoot at 2.8, but certainly if you've got a lens that's 3.5 or 4.5, it will be fine. It just means that you'll need a bit more light, and so the opportunity to create those action shots in terms of the light availability becomes slightly less. That's all. Okay, looks like I've answered somebody else's question amongst somebody else's question, if that makes sense. Slightly bizarre way of explaining. So here we go. Here's a good one. Yeah, this comes up a lot. So a macro lens, the main feature of a macro lens is the ability for it to get really close, and it's those shots you see of spiders where you can see their eyes and they're really sharp, or leaves of flowers or the buds and stuff really, really close. So that's one of the main features of a macro lens. I used to have a Canon 100mm macro lens. It's a really good lens actually, and it's one of their less expensive pro lenses, and it's f2.8, and so that's great for macro, but it's also a 100mm lens at 2.8, because the fact that it can close focus, or the minimum focus distance is less, so you can, you know, literally almost have the lens touching the subject and it will still focus, is what a macro lens is about. But ordinarily using it in any other environment, it's a 100mm lens. So yeah, absolutely is the answer. You can use it for action shots. The only thing I would say is sometimes macro lenses, the main feature of a macro lens is the ability of the optics, the way they're structured, to get really close to the image. So they're not, that's their main function. And they'll focus and they work, but they focus speed, the speed at which the lens will grab focus and move the lenses or the glass around to keep tracking focus, is a second priority. So they're not always the fastest lenses when it comes to focusing speed, but you know, certainly the 100mm one that I had was plenty fast enough. So I hope that answers that question. So there we go, an hour already. Wow. Well, unless there's any other questions, I'll start wrapping it up there. So I will just to sort of wrap up about the Beyond the Lens Academy, because I'm getting lots of emails at the moment, people saying I wanted to join but it's closed, what's that all about? So as I said earlier at the beginning, we are opening again on the 1st of July for all the 3 levels of membership for 4 days only. And the reason I do that, because that's the other question I get asked, is because this membership or this academy is about people learning stuff and getting exposed to new information and getting feedback and getting motivated and inspired. And so that's what I spend my time doing, as any of the members in there will probably tell you. So I don't want to spend all my time marketing to new members. We obviously have to do that because we're a business. But by having the membership shut for a month or so, we can then focus on all the new members that are coming in, get to know them, do some one-to-ones, and move forward. So that's why I do it. 1st of July is opening for 4 days. Make sure you're on, and I'll put a little slide up here and leave it on for a minute at the end here, which is just to say, in fact, I'll put it up now. Let me just give it that comment question. Where is it? Do that there, and then this is information as to where you find us. Where's it gone? Bear with me. There we go. So that's the website, www.beyondthelensacademy.com. I will type it in the comments for you, so you've got it. So basically, go to that website, and you'll see the first link you'll see on there is to join the mailing list. Now, I don't send out spam emails and stuff all the time, but it is important if you're thinking about joining us to be on the database for us to send emails out to remind people that we're launching and what the offers and stuff are. So get yourself on the mailing list. That way you won't miss out. Let me just type this in the link. I'm doing that now. Lens. Make sure I spell it right. Academy.com. www.beyondthelensacademy.com. It looks right. Beyond the Lens Academy. Yeah, good. I'm notorious for getting typos and stuff. So yeah, get yourself on there. That will make sure that you get to know. And occasionally, if anybody's on there, I send reminders out about these sort of free webinars. They obviously appear on the Facebook page. So if you're on this Facebook page, like it and follow it or whatever, because that way you'll just get reminders. Because as you know, Facebook doesn't show everything to everybody who follows a page. Well, it shows more people who follow the page information than if you just like it. So that's worth doing. So yeah, okay, brilliant. Thanks, Corinne, for the heads up on that. I'm glad the link's working because I've done it before and it's not working. So look, thanks everybody for joining. I hope you've enjoyed this session. I certainly have, and I love the fact that we've had. I've lost count of the questions, but it's partly why I do this, because it's just great fun. So have a lovely evening. I will leave this running now for half a minute, just so people can get the website address. It's obviously in the links to the comments anyway. And I shall probably be doing another one next week. So make sure you get yourself on that database so that you get to know when they are, because I keep moving the dates and times around a bit. So thanks for your time, and we'll catch up soon. Bye.